Welcome to the State of the Biz. My name is Richie Scola. I'm here with Brian Zacharias. Today we are going to be having a conversation regarding renewals and rent increases in a single-family rental portfolio. Me and Brian were just having a conversation, and we thought it'd be great to put this on camera and share it with the audience. We have over 60 employees here, and we are in the property management, asset management business. And we kind of take for granted some of the siloed conversations, Brian, that we have as a management and leadership team. And sometimes it doesn't always make its way down to the folks that are actually executing in the field with the residents and executing on the property management side and with our finance and accounting team. So we wanted to kind of put this on video and just have a conversation about the importance of renewals, renewing residents, and also rental increases and how that benefits the performance of the portfolio and the ownership. So with that, Brian, welcome to the State of the Biz.
Always happy to be here. I feel like I'm becoming a staple, and it's
that you are.
I don't mind
that
it, but yeah, to kind of piggyback off that before we start, I think to your point, we do that a lot. We have conversations at a high level where we're talking to partners and owners and investors, and we understand kind of why we're doing what we do. We've got a lot of folks in the team here doing the blocking and tackling, and they're inundated in the now with the residents and the process and all that stuff. So it's hard to kind of bring light to the why they're doing what they do. I think they all understand conceptually what that is. But why they're doing that? Why are we asking them to do, a 2% increase or push for this or push for that? So I figured, we talked about it, doing this to just explain the why and the aspects of every piece of the renewal process and the trickle effect and ultimately where you and I look to the partners and owners and why they're pushing for these things and all that. So I think it'll be a good exercise to stay out of the minutia, but talk high level of what all of these things that the folks, in the office and on the team do, what that impact is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we put some notes down and things that we wanted to kind of highlight. And I think at the top of the list is just the stability and the continuity of the overall portfolio, right? The renewals, they help you maintain that stable stream of income and avoid the vacancies, right? That's the name of the game, right? In single family or even multifamily, any kind of rental office space, right? It's how, it costs so much to go ahead and market and to acquire that customer or that resident, that how do you keep them in the property as long as possible in their lease term, whether it's 12 months. In our world, we do 12-month predominantly, 12-month leases in the single family space. So speak a little bit about that, the importance of that, if you would.
Sure. I think, if you look at it, any business you're in, the more exposure you have, or risk of vacancy or loss of income, that's important and something that you really need to focus on. So, if you think of turnover as kind of exposure, right? Lease expirations are exposure. If we don't have a new lease coming up, that term ends, we don't know what's going to happen. They move out. So we don't have stability. There's no stability to say, we have confidence that we're going to have this consistent stream of revenue. If we have 50% of our residents' lease expirations coming up, we don't have them renewed, they all could move out. And that's a risk that the owners don't want to take, right? They have to pay these mortgages, they pay their partners, all of the things, depending on the type. And also from our perspective and the owner's perspective, all of the costs to perform the business of if a home were to move out, people aren't thinking about it because we give them the systems and the tools to use that, but there's cost and nickel and dime cost to all of that.
So that's the second thing, right?
Yeah.
The cost savings is what you're touching on, right? So that's not only do you have the stability and the continuity being important of the overall portfolio, but that's the thing, you just nailed it. The cost of turnover is really what could be the difference between a portfolio that performs well and one that doesn't.
Yep. And there's a couple different elements to that, obviously first, and we'll do this on a different segment, as far as what's encompassed in actually turning the property, the painting the paint, rolling the paint roller, swinging the hammer, all that type of stuff and what the impact is there. But, even deploying resources to go do a move out inspection, that costs money, right? That's windshield time. We got to pay somebody to do that. We're getting the inspections done and then deploying resources to turn them and get them ready. And then once they're ready, there's a cost impact there of advertising, marketing, getting the materials put together,
commissions that are paid to lease up, right?
Exactly.
So they add up, all those costs.
Yeah, on top of just the vacancy loss of $60 or so per home just sitting vacant. There's no revenue being generated, but we're spending a lot of money to get it turned around.
So an average 2,000 square foot single family detached home could cost anywhere from $1,500 to $4,500 to turn.
Absolutely.
To turn that unit, maybe even more when you factor in the marketing costs and
Absolutely.
The loss of revenue, right? If you're
utility expenses,
utility
things like
expenses,
that, lawn care,
vacancy expense, that's
Yep.
Yeah, it all adds up. It's probably north. It could be. It depends on the asset. Every asset is different.
Yeah. So if you look at it, when you turn a home, you've got around a 45 to 60 day average window that it's vacant from the time that person moves out. So that's almost 2 months worth of rent that you're missing, but you're spending almost the same amount, if not more, in that loss. So that's a double negative, right?
Yeah.
So you,
And
not only did you not make that 2 months,
right.
you spent 2.5 months.
And how many months does it take to recoup those thousands of dollars that it costs? So that's why turnover retention is
huge.
Is everything.
It's the lifeblood of the business, really. Yep.
And then the third thing was predictable cash flows, right? So when renewals, you've already got with a renewal, you already have a resident that's in a property.
Right.
That's hopefully a satisfied resident. To renew them, we just touched on what it costs if they move out. So to renew them, the value of renewing them and to keep that predictable cash flow, right? That's a retained, they're going to continue to extend that lease another 12 months. That's another 12 months of predictable cash flow for the portfolio, which helps the overall performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the more you have your portfolio locked in a commitment, in a lease. Now that there's legal things that could happen in between that. Life happens, right? So something happens, they stop paying rent. That's a whole different element to it. But having that stability of 90, if we're 95% of the portfolio is occupied. What's our exposure rate coming up to the next month? Is 20% of that in the next quarter? Coming up to expire, that's not good. So the further ahead too on these that we can be, the better it is for not only us but the owners. The further downstream we get, the less exposure, and then we know 3-4 months out. Okay, the next couple of months we're looking at a 20%, 25% turnover rate versus a 40 to 50% turnover rate. So that stability, that's huge. And then you can predict your cash, your expenses, your P&L, and make sure that we're profitable. And that gives comfort to the owners, and that keeps us in business.
And we manage that with the team, with the lease profile, where, like you said, we're always looking upstream, 120 to 180 days, looking at what does that lease profile look like for expirations, that wall of worry,
right?
That sometimes seasonality comes into play there, right? April, May, June, July. That's typically people are moving around or more apt to move around, because kids are out of school and things, life is happening. So being able to manage that is what you're referencing when you talk about going upstream.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned lease profile, because that's something that I know we kind of throw these different options in at certain periods of time to the team and say, okay, let's offer these things. But the importance to that is looking at that lease profile of where do these lease expirations fall. There are certain periods of time that we want our highest to fall out because it's the hottest leasing season, right? It's always kind of, spring into summer when school's out, people are more apt to move and make a change in their life. So that's when we can lease the best. And obviously winter months, everybody's more stagnant. So we want to try to kind of push our lease expirations as we're doing new leases, the renewals, to certain pockets. And then we want to spread the rest out, strategically. Obviously the lower, the better in the winter months as far as the exposure of potential turnover. But that's why we went through an exercise the last couple of months of pushing not only 12-month leases, but on renewals, putting them into a 14 or 18, depending on where the rest of the portfolio fell. So that's why we did that. That's the importance of it.
It's like balancing out a bell curve.
Yeah,
There's a bell curve just with the natural seasonality of when people tend to move.
Yeah. So going into 2025, all of that hard work is going to make life much easier, not only on us from an operations perspective, but it gives the owners and the partners a better understanding of their cash flow, their stability in the portfolio. And when it's not as stable, they know that it's going to fall into that period of time where we feel very good about leasing them right back up. We turn them and we put somebody else back in it, and then hopefully there for they are there for 2-3 years.
Right,
So,
which brings us to the next point is the rental growth, right? So that means what we mean by that is the increase in the rent year over year, right? So whether it's 1, 2, 3, 5%, depending on the market, depending on the demand, the rental growth, because a perfect example is last year, owners of all properties for that matter, not just single family, multifamily, office, we all felt the impact of incredible increases in insurance to insure the properties. Went up, double digits, 20, 30, 40% in some instances. And then property taxes, right? Property taxes, reassessment. So those are real hard costs to the bottom line that, that have to be factored in. And ultimately the only way to continue to operate the portfolio is it has to be profitable, meaning you got to cover all those expenses plus your debt service, plus your maintenance and repairs. So these rental increases help the stability of the portfolio being able to be profitable enough to maintain itself, right? Depending on the more scale you have in a portfolio, the stronger, because you're dispersing that risk across more assets. But that was something that really hit a lot of our partners and us dramatically last year, and that rental increase. So that's just inflation that's happening all around us, is happening to the owners and our partners in these assets. So that has to be, when we the rental growth, the only way to offset that is to increase rents.
Yep.
And depending on the market, depending on the supply and demand is what usually drives those percentages.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think to that point, that's well said. I think a common misconception in the industry is especially from renters, because they're renting and they're paying. I get that, right?
Sure.
They keep us in business. Is that these owners, these landlords, make a ton of money? That's not the case, and that's where we, from an operations perspective, have to really fine tune the machine every day and really look at every property, specifically to your point of where is the rent now. We're not trying to take advantage of people, but there is real costs associated to owning these properties, and it's not we want to capture to make a ton more money, as far as our margin. It's we've got to offset these expenses that are happening. So how do we do that? We start with not turning them over. Then there's no expenses, but at the same time, there's got to be a reasonable amount of rent increase to increase that revenue, because to your point, there's uncontrollable things that happen, that continue to happen with taxes and insurance, that are just making the profit of owning these homes to where it's a very, you say it all the time, it's a nickel and dime business, and that's 100% true. So every time we can save turnover or turning a property over, that's huge, those expenses. But the rent increase is super important. But we've also got to govern it to a certain aspect to not overprice our homes to push people out over the next 2 or 3 years where they could rent next door for $500 less. There's got to be it's got to be managed properly, and I think our team does well at that. You got to look at it specifically to that property, to that market, where their rent was before. It's not just going to be a blanket. We get 4%. Like that's because that's not always true. It may be 2%. It may make sense to do 2% because we want to keep that person. We throw a 5 to 6%. They are likely over the next 12 months looking for another place to live.
Right. And these are all these are market forces.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like if we go shopping at the grocery store, we have, as a consumer, which the resident, the renter is the consumer, and you go to the gas pump, you go to the grocery store. All that inflation gets passed downstream to the consumer, whether you're going shopping in the supermarket or you're going to the gas station, and it's in housing as well, right? So it's it's just a real cost of doing business that has to be passed through. So it's
and to that point, I think those are easy things to understand from as a consumer, a true consumer of gas, and it's a tangible item. The mindset, and it's never going to be that way. So that takes a great team to explain things to these people as we're doing the renewal process. It's, and the renewal process isn't just, here's your new lease, we want to get 4%. That happens from day one when somebody moves in. The customer service and letting them know that we care about them and having them understand kind of what we're here for and what's the why behind what we're doing. And we do that well. So, but to that point is, milk increases by $1. People just accept that because they get it, right?
Yeah.
They know
they don't like it.
But they don't like it. Yeah. But the same thing happens with a rental home.
Exactly, it does.
It's just not hey, I got this rental home.
Yeah,
I paid a little bit more. I'm frustrated, but I think they don't see it that way. So it takes the team understanding that why of the rent increases to be able to articulate that to the residents. And we can satisfy them. They're not going to be happy, but that's why, right?
Right.
And it's okay to tell them that. We want to be 100%. Honest with our residents to say, we're doing the best we can to manage the rent for you. We understand. We want you to be a resident long term. And there is room, but there's a certain point where we have to kind of hold the line, or else we're out of business.
Yeah, and I think that you just touched on it, that resident satisfaction, which is something that we focus on. It's probably the number one thing that the team is always focused on, and that's really communicating, setting the expectation, explaining why. Giving the resident, if they have a question or a concern about whether it's a repairs and maintenance issue, that providing that quality service when they call, somebody's there to hear it, to dissect it, to dispatch if necessary, to remedy whatever the situation is, and then on a renewal to talk them through the different options if it's a seasonality thing, and also maybe if they need a little more explanation on why their rent is going up. And that's often the case, but they have somebody that they could pick up and speak to, and we do a great job of that.
And we have a renewal team that I think, looking at it from I'm in a position on the team doing something else perspective, I think there's blinders to the fact that they're not the only ones doing the renewals. They're actually probably the least impactful as far as if somebody's going to stay or not. They're just the transactional piece. And yes, they can save them for sure based on their customer service, but it starts with the leasing team, the ones doing the new applications. And really, nobody ever sees this because it's kind of the forgotten child in the group is occupied maintenance. The folks doing occupied maintenance are really your retention team, because people don't want to have people at the home. That, as much as we think that's the case, like they don't want us to be there as much as we don't want to be there. It's an inconvenience. Yeah. So managing that inconvenience the best we can, at the same time saving money, right? Because that's another expense that really adds up. If you look at most institutional kind of portfolios, in a calendar year, your 12-month period, you're going to spend the same on your occupied maintenance spend as you do on your turnover. Like that, it took a long time to really see that, because it was just kind of a forgotten thing, like, oh, we've got to maintain these properties back in the day when we first kind of came into this industry. But that's where the rubber meets the road. If we can do that really, really well, people see that, people appreciate that, and then when it comes to renew, like, hey, we've got to give you a 4%, based on market conditions. Not a problem. We love you. Like, thank you for taking care of us. Like, that's the win.
Yeah,
they're
being heard. They're being,
But even if the
service is there,
absolutely.
If we need to dispatch, and
but to that point, even if they leave, even if they life change happens, we can't keep them. It's just not possible.
Happens, right?
That happens. That customer service will save us on the turnover costs. Happy residents take care of the property better.
Agreed.
Agreed. So all of those things, even if we can't keep them, doing all of those things help us to either keep them, or if we can't keep them, get a quality product turned back to us where we can clean it and put it right back to the market. That's a perfect scenario.
Yeah, because in 99% of the cases, we have 1 month of security deposit, which goes back to this as a security deposit. It's refundable back to that resident or customer when they move out, less any damages or things like that are not within the parameters of the lease. So to your point, great residents usually turn over those properties in very good condition. If it's the opposite of that and somebody really destroys the property, it does extensive damage, you only have 1 month security deposit. Now, you could go and put a judgment and go down that rabbit hole, but that's a long, drawn-out process.
You're only guaranteed that deposit.
Yeah, you're guaranteed that deposit. So to your point, the resident satisfaction and keeping good communication, good service, and getting those properties back, because it will come back
absolutely
to bite you if they leave the property in disrepair,
Right.
it's normally going to cost much more than that security deposit of $1,500 to turn that property and get it rent ready and remarket it and everything that goes.
And that's the
along with
impact.
that.
That's I think the resounding theme of this conversation is if we want to keep everybody, like that's the goal, but everything we do from start to finish and the care we take for the residents and treating them with empathy and saying no is fine too. Just communicate the no and the why behind the no.
Correct. That's the biggest thing.
But it really, everybody's gonna move out at some point. There's a strong possibility, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, but so all of these things, it's a long-term strategy. This is a commitment that we're doing life with our residents. And if we look at it that way, then they'll stay longer. They'll treat the home better. So, really just being a top class, property management company that truly cares. And I know, you
Sounds
as the
cliche.
owner, but you do.
But you're right, it's
and
important.
that's how we treat each other is treat our residents as if they're your family, because it's true. Like, it's the most intimate place that all of the life happens inside, under the roof, that we're providing for these residents. There's babies being born, there's marriages happening, there's divorces, unfortunately, there's tough times, there's deaths happening. So it's important for our team to have that perspective of understanding what we just talked about, of the why. Yeah, it's a business at the end of the day, but
it exists.
But it exists to service people, because they need housing.
Yeah, absolutely.
They need housing, and we can provide it, and we want to be the best we can at providing that. And some are not going to understand that. And that's okay too.
You can't make everybody happy.
And if they move on, sometimes that's okay. We're not a good fit for everybody, right? So, but yeah, I think that's the resounding theme of why we do what we do. Same with new leases. So when they do turn over, talking about rent increases, I know we talked about renewals, but looking at the last rent that we had on the property and really being strategic about pushing that rent forward on a new applicant and being kind of in fair market value, we want to make sure that we're in line. But that's just as important, right? Because the blended average of rent increases is where ultimately we can keep everything profitable enough to provide quality service.
Yeah, and I go back to market forces. So one of the things you're starting to see in the multifamily space is some softening, some rental declines in certain markets. And that works to the benefit of the consumer or the resident or the customer, but based on what's happening in the market at that renewal or at that initial move-in is what dictates the value, right? We could want the owner could want $10,000 in rent, but the market is only $1,500. So you can put it out there for 10, but nobody.
Yeah.
But if the market is 10,000, then that's the market forces will either allow you to get that, or it won't allow you to get that. So that's important too, because we can price something at something that's unrealistic, but
it just sits on the shelf.
But it just sits there because there's other options for the consumer.
Absolutely.
To go ahead and get that. You can get a gallon of milk for $1.99 and add the same gallon of milk down the road for $3.99. Well, most people are going to, word gets out, that's where you go to get your milk, to get it at $1.99, assuming it's apples to apples. And, milk to milk in this instance.
Milk to milk. But some people may like that higher price milk, and so there's a balance, because you let it ride, and there's a buyer for everything. But it's how long are you willing to sacrifice, and I think that we do a good job here of finding that sweet spot of, we're not pushing, we're not trying to take advantage of anybody. But if we can get the max rent, that's good for everybody here. That's good for the owners. And
it keeps the portfolio profitable,
keeps it healthy,
and it makes it keeps it healthy, and that keeps it growing.
Well, and to be honest,
and
with
that
you,
provides the housing that's needed in the marketplace.
Yeah, and
ultimately, that's, if it wasn't profitable, there wouldn't be investors or individual investors or groups of investors or institutional investors coming in and providing something that's really needed now more than ever, and everybody needs housing.
I totally agree. Yeah, and I think if you look at it, the rental increases, as much as renters won't like it, ultimately that prevents, and we've seen this in the industry, when you start to get a portfolio that isn't making money, you have to make a business decision. Not our investors, but you and I have dealt with this before, where if we don't do all of these things well and get what is needed to sustain that and give quality property management, it ends up impacting those residents in a negative way
that they don't
because the ownership change, or they may non-renew them to sell the property. Like those things are
they
real.
become collateral
Yeah,
damage.
and it's hard to articulate that to
I
the
know.
residents,
No,
but I
yeah.
think for our team and the team in any property management company, it's important to understand that, because it's easy to kind of, they're taking the shots. I get it, right? It's like, I'm not paying 3% more, and it's frustrating. But I think it's important to know kind of why we need to get a certain, minimum increase, because those things can happen. And we've both seen them in the, 10 plus years we've done this.
And there's real costs associated with it.
So those are the type of things I think for this kind of setting, it's important to know, because at the end of the day, sometimes the hard conversations are the ones that'll end up helping the residents, right?
Yeah, they get that understanding.
Yeah, so.
Good. Well, Brian, this was awesome.
It was
I
fun.
know we wanted
Yeah.
to. We were having this conversation. Like we've got to have this conversation on video so we could share it with the team, share it with the audience. Hopefully, there's some value there. If you got some value at it, please hit the thumbs up.
I think you provided.
Feel free to subscribe. We love comments. If you could throw a comment in there, whether you see something a little differently than me and Brian, we definitely don't. We've been in the business a long time, but we don't know everything. But we wanted to share some of the thoughts, and hopefully that brings value to everybody out there. So until next time, we'll see you. We'll see you soon. Thanks.